our big thing has always been that while every brand says that they don't animal test, we know that they use loopholes. And sometimes it's a loophole that says, except we're required by law. Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. And it's been so wonderful to listen to the previous presenters. It's quite awe-inspiring and quite humbling to recognize that there are so many people out there doing such amazing things around the world. I'd like to give you a little bit of a history on world cosmetics and the animal testing industry, and then obviously South Africa, past and present. Just a short background on Beauty Without Cruelty. In South Africa, where we established in 1975, although traditionally the Beauty Without Cruelty charity was started in 1958 by Lady Dowding in England. We are the oldest surviving, and to my knowledge, the only surviving animal rights organization left in South Africa. Some have amalgamated, some have changed, and some have just simply died a natural death. We were initially focused on fur, ivory, and cosmetics testing. And as time has gone by, we've evolved to include any and all animal exploitation and to offer kinder choices for consumers who may not be aware of A, what is going on, or B, that there are actually options open to them. So cosmetics appeared thousands of years ago. And of course, in recent years, chemists have had to test their creations in order to be able to deem them safe for general consumption. But before this all took place, many civilizations around the world used whatever ingredients they had, often causing severe harm both to their skin and to their health. So, for example, in Egypt and India, face mascaras and various cosmetic products could even cause death. In ancient Egypt, during periods when the Nile flooded, Egyptians had infections caused by particles that entered the eye and caused diseases and inflammations. Scientists now argue that the lead-based makeup that they used acted actually as a toxin-killing bacteria before it spread, but of course it also gave them lead poisoning. In the 1700s, in Europe, women painted their faces pure white with Venetian ceruse, and this is made by mixing lead with vinegar. Red cheeks came with cinnabar, and this was a pigment that was sometimes used to decorate paintings and pottery, and it's actually mercury sulfide. This can cause vomiting, necrosis, chronic poisoning with severe effects on the kidneys, the nervous system, and of course, mental health. In the late 1800s, US newspapers advertised tins of wafers that, if eaten, promised to remove freckles, pimples, and other facial marks. Yes, the products contained poison. It wasn't a secret. It was clearly marked on the label, which reads arsenic complexion wafers. And the wafers actually made the skin fashionably pale by destroying red blood cells. But people who were using it were actually also slowly killing themselves. Despite tremendous progress in reducing animal testing for cosmetics around the world, it persists, and there doesn't seem to be a definitive end in sight. The reasons for this are not entirely clear, because consumers, animal rights activists, and some corporations themselves already engaged in animal testing all seem to want it to end. And while governments still require that the testing of drugs and other consumer products require animals, there is no explicit requirement for the animal testing of cosmetics. I'm sure you've all heard of the LD50 test, lethal dosage 50%, which means that 50% of the animals used need to die so that you can get a result, which is absolutely and utterly meaningless for several reasons. Most cosmetic products are not particularly poisonous or especially poisonous, but it follows that if animals are to be killed in this way, then significant quantities must be forced into their stomachs, blocking or breaking internal organs, or killing these animals through a slow and painful death. Sorry, I've just lost something here. Excuse me a second. This is also, I'm sorry, I happen to have lost a page of notes, but we will carry on. It's not a problem. And starving to death also is incredibly painful. One new ingredient in any cosmetic product used in these tests could lead to the deaths of at least 1,400 animals. And the big thing is that we know that animals don't react in the same way as humans do. We know, for example, that rabbits do not have tear ducts, which means that when we drop concentrated doses of cosmetics, whether it be shampoo or mascara or anything else that is used on the body, into their eyes, unlike us, they cannot flush it out. Their whole physiology is completely different. And the horrific thing is that rabbits have been known to actually break their back in the stocks to try and get away from the pain. The big thing is that there are so many options available that include organs on a chip. There are options like skin tissue cells, computer programs, and over and above that, there are organs on a chip. And they're relevant, they're advanced, and most importantly, they're scientifically accurate. We know, as I'm sure you do, that, for example, when it comes to vivisection, medical research, we have delayed progress with so many things because we have used animals who do not react in the same way. Penicillin is the easiest example that I can think of right off the top of my head, that if penicillin had been tested on guinea pigs, we would not have a life-saving antibiotic that is used around the world for millions and millions of people for all kinds of things. Why? Because it kills guinea pigs. In 1970s, a campaign started, and it wasn't aimed specifically at Revlon. But the interesting thing about this is that Revlon, like all the big name brands, were, and many still are, using animals for cosmetic testing. But a program was launched and a huge advertising campaign which brought this to the public's attention. Just as a matter of interest, on a sidebar, you would find that if you went back into research, you would find that in the pre-70s, a lot of the papers that were published by researchers and vivisectionists would actually publish photographs of the animals they used. And in the 70s, there seemed to be a boom in animal rights organizations and the awareness of animal use and abuse for human benefit, in inverted commas. And this probably came about because it was sort of post the 60s, which was the hippie era, and the time of love and peace, and recognizing that we all have a space on the planet. The 70s was an amazing era, or an amazing decade. And this brought the whole animal testing, especially for cosmetics, to the fore. Now, I just need to try and move this so I can get there. We go. In 1996, a group of animal protection groups formed the Coalition for Consumer Information on Cosmetics. And this was to promote a single comprehensive standard for animal testing claims. And they provided the internationally recognized Leaping Bunny logo. And they have done tremendous work all around the world. I mean, they're well known in the USA, the EU, Britain, and Canada. And they have got, the coalition is of organizations from all those countries. The next slide is just our logo. And the reason I wanted our logo to come up is because as I said before, in 1975, we started. And our criteria has evolved slightly over the years, but what we share in common with Leaping Bunny, which is well known around the world, is that every single ingredient must be accredited. There are no excuses. We don't accept a letter from a CEO or a company of a head of the company to say that we don't and we won't animal test. There we go, resume share. Sorry, I must apologize for that. I don't know what I did. So that's one of the big criteria. And of course, we insist on a cutoff date. And I think there's a lot of confusion around what a cutoff date is. Everything has been animal tested at some point. And I know that here in South Africa, people are very often totally incredulous that something as innocuous as our very famous rooibos tea, known as Red Bush in America and in England, which is a caffeine-free tea, is used in medical research to see whether it's efficacious against cancers and tumors. And we've actually removed a specific brand from our list because one of our criteria is that you cannot use or you cannot support or fund medical testing. So we have been going for, as I say, almost 50 years. And to this end, we currently have almost 200 brands listed. And in the grand scheme of things, it sounds like very little, but because our criteria is so stringent, we no longer accept, for example, applicant companies who are not 100% plant-based. So while on our humane guide, there will still be brands that have vegetarian products. This is because they were accredited before 2018. And yes, they all have to reapply, but their original criteria stays. All new applicants who wish to use our logo and be listed by us must now be plant-based. If they're not, they can still apply. And what we would do then is simply allow them or supply them with a certificate confirming that they have complied with our stringent criteria as far as animal testing goes, and this they can use for marketing, but we do not promote them. Also, we are a relatively small country when it comes to products and brands, and we obviously have a number of imports as well. I'm stuck. There we go. One of the biggest things we've discovered is that labeling is essential and really, really important. And around the world, there are all kinds of things. So you've got cruelty-free, there's not tested on animals, there's this product has not been tested on animals, or salon tested on people, or the product ingredients not tested on animals. Every single brand on the planet claims that they do not animal test. And it doesn't matter what they say. What really matters is what they can prove. And I know that there are salted bunnies out there, and labeling also allows people to make a claim that says that this product has not been animal tested. And that may well be true, but the other criteria is not adhered to. The interesting thing is that we do not and have never charged a single cent for accredited anybody or any brand, and we have never charged for the use of our logo. And this matters because it's been interesting to note that, for example, in 1 year, 6 different companies decided to use our logo on their products. They never approached us. When questioned, they all said, oh, they didn't know. And one company in particular, when we phoned up and said, you know, we have one of your products in our hand, it was a gift. We see that there's a logo on your product, but it's not on the humane guide. We were told that, oh, Beauty Without Cruelty wants to charge 10,000 Rand or something ridiculous for every product that they accredit, and we've got 50 products in our range. And well, this is completely ludicrous and nonsensical. We've also had people who have claimed that they've put our logo in their window and said, we don't use this logo because Beauty Without Cruelty allows chemicals in their products. They've obviously never heard of things like H2O, which is merely water. Everything is a chemical. We understand what they're meaning, but the point is that, as with all the other brands or the other organizations that do, like, for example, Leaping Bunny, the criteria is about animal testing. And these days, with 7,000 plus ingredients that are freely available to use, that have been proven to be free from animal testing, and that goes back to my observation about the cutoff date, because we know that everything has been animal tested at some point. We have a cutoff date, which means that before you apply, your ingredients may not have been animal tested within 5 years of application. And that's also why we don't use the term cruelty-free. We can say humanely manufactured, but cruelty-free really goes far deeper than just cosmetic testing or animal testing. It also means, for example, that it must be fair trade. It must be free from animal ingredient printing. And there are a whole host of other things that come into it. So it's not just the product. It means that the packaging must also comply to certain ingredients. So while we know that it is a very easy on the tongue and easily used and easily recognized statement to say that something is cruelty-free, we prefer the term humanely manufactured. So to date, we've had 43 countries around the world that have specifically banned animal testing on cosmetics and or the import of said animal tested cosmetics, and that excludes specific states in the States and of course 13 in Brazil. So what's South Africa waiting for? Well, it's an interesting question. Technically, there are no laboratories in South Africa that do animal testing for cosmetics specifically. This has been confirmed by the relevant departments of health, the Cosmetics, Toiletries and Fragrances Association, and our national SPCA. So it should be a slam dunk. Logic dictates that if it's going to benefit small businesses who are going to thrive because they don't have to comply with any bungling, uncomfortable and unnecessary legislation regarding testing, because either they're using already proven ingredients, or it's already been proven safe and there are alternate methods available, and that it makes it easier to export to countries that already only accept free from animal testing products, and it's not going to cost any jobs. It's all rather sad. So in 2017, we started pushing very hard for a cosmetic testing bill, and we wanted it specifically and narrowly focused on cosmetic testing, because at the same time that we were doing this, there's also been a movement to amend and update our animal welfare policy. The sad reality is that this has taken 10 years thus far. Nothing's really happened with the animal welfare policy. There are very valid concerns that while it is inadequate, changing or amending the animal welfare bill could make things worse for animals, because we seem to have people in power who are firmly of the opinion that if an animal is not able to pay its way and be exploited and be of financial benefit, it's irrelevant. So we want this, because I said to you now also, there are no laboratories in South Africa that are currently testing cosmetics on animals. We want the legislation as a symbolic gesture. We want to close the door on anybody else wanting to come in here and start an animal testing laboratory because they can no longer do so in their own country. And it's confirming a principled stand to ensure that it won't happen going forward, much like New Zealand did. And our Constitutional Court recently ruled that human sentiment is not necessary in the driving force for animal welfare concerns, but rather the welfare and the well-being and the needs of the animals themselves. So in South Africa, we eventually got the bill going onto the table, in a manner of speaking. So it was presented in 2018, but there seemed to be a little bit of a misconception or a misunderstanding about what we were trying to achieve. And so there were a lot of inputs regarding other animal issues, all of which were absolutely valid, but they have nothing to do with cosmetic testing. And because things were a bit shaky in 2018, it was shelved, which meant that it sort of died a natural death. It was put on the back burner, which was not a bad thing. And we were able to resurrect this and fine-tune it and make it incredibly specific. So the purpose of the private members' bill was to amend 2 acts with the intention to prohibit the sale and manufacturing of cosmetics that were tested in South Africa, and to criminalize the testing of cosmetics on animals for cosmetic purposes, taking the loophole for pharmaceutical purposes into account. And of course, all human and animal grooming products fall under this category of cosmetics. Now, should this bill have been successful, we would be the first country in Africa to follow current international best practice in this regard. As I've said, there are no jobs at stake. Countries which have banned cosmetics animal testing have thriving cosmetic industries, and that confirms that humans aren't in any way adversely affected by change. Of course, it also mentioned it increases the export probability of local brands to countries with bans in place, and it really deserves the support, the unreserved support of all decent, humane, and compassionate South Africans. So it was amended and presented in 2022, and 4 government meetings were held this year. We were present via Zoom, because all the meetings were held via Zoom, and we were not able to participate, which was probably just as well. Our representative was incredibly eloquent, extremely passionate about this situation. And unfortunately, there was a lot of deflection and diversion and questions that had absolutely no bearing on the matter at hand. And the interesting thing was that at the first meeting, the chairperson of the meeting stated that he was of the opinion that the bill was important, it was uncomplicated, that sentience and suffering of animals matters, and the clear implication was that he was fully in favor of the bill. A South African poll that was done showed that 90% of people who were approached were in favor of a ban. 86% would support laws preventing the sale of animal tested in cosmetics, regardless of the country of origin. And 86% confirmed that so-called cruelty-free claims dictate their spending habits, which is interesting. And there were thousands and thousands of submissions in favor of a ban. Almost 50 animal welfare organizations representing tens of thousands of people were in favor. On a side note, in 2009, the 7th World Congress on Alternatives in Animal Use in Life Sciences was held, and the EU cosmetics testing law extended its ban to animal testing of cosmetic ingredients, as well as the marketing of cosmetic products whose ingredients have been tested on or March the 11th, 2009. That's ages ago. We should be embracing this wholeheartedly. And the sad thing is that South African taxpayers unknowingly fund vivisection through their taxes, and those who do know are doing so very often unwillingly through the Department of Health. And there's no transparency in this regard, as records of the number of animals used and for what purpose is not easily available. A source of ours has confirmed that South Africa uses approximately 100,000 animals a year. And we have done a lot of research. We have made a lot of approaches to government departments and to individuals who could possibly assist. Ultimately, after the 4 meetings, at the last one, the bill was declared as undesirable. And they don't really have to give a reason. It was suggested that instead of banning it, that companies who want to use animals to test their cosmetics on should apply to the relevant department for special permission, that the 3 or 4R should be implemented. It's very clear that the people who were listening were not listening and had not done their research, had not bothered to read the 2 pages of that, all it was regarding the bill. And there was no real interest. However, we remain undefeated because next year we have national elections. And so next year, once there's a new parliament in place and there are new people in place, we will start again. It can be despondent, as I'm sure we have all been dealt a bad blow by government departments or by issues that really should be non-issues. And taking all the positives that South Africa would have taken if they had chosen to extend the ban or to access and allow the ban, which would have gone through this year before the new parliament starts. There were so many benefits to it, but it is what it is. There's only so much that we can control. So, our Humane Guide. We've got 2 websites. We've got bwcsa.co.za and we've got a sidebar, humaneguide.co.za. We are currently in the process of updating both. And we're very excited about the fact that our guide will now also have a search function, which up until now we haven't. So people have had to very laboriously scroll through alphabetically to find what they're looking for. We have got national brands, we've got small brands. What is exciting to see is that we're getting far more smaller brands coming through. So there are small local groups and individuals who are now starting to realize that they can make a living, who can also start employing other people. For those of you who don't know, we have one of the highest unemployment rates in the world. And that goes hand in hand with regular electricity outages and such like, which makes making a living really difficult for a lot of people. But having the small brands coming through, especially from rural areas and small towns, is incredibly exciting. We have a number of chain stores who are currently going through and making sure that all their house brands are going to be listed with us, which is marvelous. And as I said, we've now got sort of roughly 200 brands listed. And our big thing has always been that while every brand says that they don't animal test, we know that they use loopholes. And sometimes it's a loophole that says, except we're required by law. Sometimes they're using ingredient that's also used for pharmaceuticals. So, and we realize that that is a sticky issue. But it's also about using other people's or other companies' animal tested data. A fixed cutoff date is really important. I know there's some very good brands out there who make claims that they don't animal test, and they probably don't, and they are probably using ingredients that are not animal tested, but they don't have a fixed cutoff date, which means in theory, they could start using an ingredient today where they stopped animal testing last week. And one of our big things has always been, what about being owned by an animal testing company? And we all know that there are very big names out there who own smaller brands, and the smaller brands themselves have been taken over, and they've never animal tested, but they're now owned by a company that does. And why this matters is, when you go in and you buy the small brand, a percentage of the profits go straight to the big brand. So you might as well just buy the big brand in the first place. And as I've mentioned, there's also funding animal-based research, which everybody does. Well, let me rephrase that. We have taken brands off our guide for doing this. And sometimes it comes up that you find out by accident that this is what's happening. And there are a number of international brands that all claim to be cruelty-free and all the rest of it. And they have their own reasons for funding medical research. The thing is that there are so many options. When we talk about vivisection and medical research, there's such a thing called trauma man. Trauma man, you can perform surgical procedures on him. He bleeds. He can die on the table, but you can resuscitate him and reuse him tomorrow morning, which is marvelous. And so much progress has been delayed and retarded by our use of animals. So in 1938, there was something called blush mascara. And a woman was blinded by it, and they then decided that they needed to, the FDA then stepped in. She was she got mascara in her eye and she was blinded, and I think it happened to 1 or 2 other people, because you could buy things over the counter without any testing, and people did cheat with ingredients and so on and so forth. And yes, if you were warned, so for example, if you were buying the arsenic wafers, you knew that there was arsenic in it. But if you weren't aware of what the ingredients were, and as I say, people cut corners, which happens today still, it was then decided that animal research needs to come into play.
Just a quick reminder, you have 1.5 minutes left for your slot.
Oh, fantastic. Okay. Then that's me done. When I ran through this earlier, it seemed to be a lot shorter. But what I wanted to say, just to end briefly, is that there is no need to use animals when we are so very different. And in fact, medical science now shows that they are now starting to make individualized medicines. And we know that men and women react differently to certain ingredients and certain medications and such like. So it makes absolutely no sense. The upside is that next year or the year after, I hope to be able to be on this space to say to you in 5 minutes, we've done it. We've banned cosmetic testing on animals in South Africa, and we look forward to a bright and happy future. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen and to attend.